If you've listened to my preaching at all, you know that I like to mention on occasion the fact that we live in what has been described as a secular age. Now, our secular age that we're living in, it has its pros and its cons, its virtues and its vices. And one of the challenges of our secular age, and it's a challenge specifically to our spiritual growth and maturity, is a phenomenon known as functional atheism. If you're not familiar with the term, functional atheism is the tendency to affirm in one's mind the existence of God, but then to live your life in such a way that it's really impossible for others to discern why or how God might matter. Functional atheist is someone who will confess with their lips that there is a God, but then in the end won't let any of their choices or habits, their actions or their values actually reflect this belief. In the words of educator and author Parker Palmer, quote, "Functional atheism is the belief that ultimate responsibility for everything rests with me." End quote. While I'm sure you can find functional atheism in a lot of different places, I suspect that it's a distinctly American problem. I mean, after all, even though the number of Americans who attend church or identify with a religious tradition is dropping with each passing year, there is still an expectation for Americans to at least be somewhat religious. You know, religious faith might not be a core element of our identities, but we still assume that people, especially in rough patches, are going to look to God for some measure of solace. The problem is that, again, we live in a secular age and it's becoming increasingly secular, and we live in a culture that's really encouraging us month after month and year after year to look past questions of life, especially questions related to faith. The result of all this is more and more of us are failing to come to terms with who God is and just what sort of claim God might have on our lives. If we were to go out into the community that I'm sure is quite busy, being a Sunday morning, and ask people who are out and about whether they think it's likely that there's a God, I'm sure most people would say yes. But I also suspect that most people couldn't say a lot more than that. And even if we were to go and to all the churches that dot our city and ask them about God, they probably would have similar responses. They would agree in their minds that God is out there, but they might struggle to articulate how that fact in the end really matters. Now, these are the cultural waters that we're all swimming in, whether we realize it or not. Another challenge to spiritual growth and maturity in 2021 is we humans, we also resist change. We resist change, and we also resist the pain that comes anytime we are broken and rebuilt. We humans also don't like conflict very much either, whether that's conflict with each other or conflict with God. What all this means is that absent God's very specific intervention in our lives, whether that's through a hardship of some sort or a spiritual experience, most people today are failing to come to grips with what they believe and what they value. But when that does happen, It's pure gift. Anytime we come face to face with a challenge, a question, a decision that really lights a fire within us, that's a gift. It's a gift for God to draw us close, to do a work of grace in our hearts. It's a gift to be able to let God do something within us, even if it's difficult or painful. It's a gift to be woken up from the functional atheism that's all around. To be woken up into something much richer and much more profound than the ordinary human life. I'm talking about functional atheism because I was reminded of it with our gospel passage this morning. We are continuing to work our way through the 6th chapter of John's gospel. If you haven't read through the John's gospel, first off, but especially chapter 6, with some measure of intentionality, I would recommend that you do so. It's a remarkable chapter. At first glance, it's about the ordinary things of life. But as you engage the chapter, you can see just how profound the message of Jesus really is. So a couple weeks ago, I talked about bread, the gift of bread and what bread can mean. And last week, I tried to talk about signs and discerning the signs that are all around us. And as we've explored this 6th chapter the last couple weeks, one thing that I want you to observe and understand is just how intentional Jesus is with his actions and his decisions in this chapter. The chapter begins with the feeding of the 5,000. And then it moves on to this gradual revelation from Jesus that he himself is the bread of life. Unlike an ordinary meal, Jesus is the only thing that will satisfy forever. I don't want you to miss how really this chapter is about a journey. Jesus is leading the people on a journey from physical hunger and physical satisfaction, then to spiritual hunger and spiritual satisfaction. And yet, as this chapter also makes clear to us, not everyone is interested in the journey. A rather important critical thread that kind of works its way through John chapter 6 is the sometimes conflict between Jesus and the crowds. You get the sense that the people are really volatile. And Jesus is popular one moment. The people are searching desperately for him on a mountaintop one moment. And then the next, they reject what he has to say. You get the sense that people struggle. And they struggle really over Jesus himself. It's Jesus that divides the people. And the claims that he makes about himself are weighty. They deserve our attention. Jesus deserves our attention. I mean, if there's one thing that you should understand from John chapter 6 is that Jesus merits our response. Okay, so in the gospel passage that we listened to, we heard about the complaints of the people about Jesus. They don't like the fact that Jesus told them that he was the bread of life. They liked it when Jesus fed them. They liked it when Jesus told them to work for the food that doesn't perish, but rather for the food that endures to eternal life. They liked it when they felt like Jesus maybe could guide them to this bread. But they drew a line at the thought that Jesus himself was the bread that they were searching for. That was a bridge too far. Now, what's interesting is how the people complain, the nature of their complaints. They complain that none of what Jesus is talking about makes any sense when you consider who Jesus is and where he was coming from. They ask, is this not Jesus? I mean, we've known this guy, right? We know his mom and his dad. How can he now say that he is from heaven? It doesn't make any sense. What the people are doing is they're struggling with this idea that God in some mysteriously wondrous way was present in the life of a carpenter, unlike any other person in human history. They think of Jesus as giving signs. They don't think of Jesus as a sign. They think of Jesus as working miracles. They don't think of Jesus as the source of all miracles. They don't think of Jesus as the bread of life. This response is it's part of a larger pattern. I mean, it's a perpetual struggle between Jesus and the people. People in the Gospels consistently struggle to get past the here and the now. They struggle to see beyond the tangible and the material. I mean, when the crowds first returned to Jesus after that feeding, when Jesus tells them straight up that I suspect that most of you are interested in just another meal. When they ask for the bread of life, it isn't clear that they're not referring to something physical. In a sense, the people in the 6th chapter of John, they're acting like functional atheists. They're at peace with God so long as he remains safely hypothetical. And the idea of incarnation, it's a scandal to the people. They're happy to keep God an arm's length away. The thought of the flesh of Jesus being their hope, well, it's an insult. They're happy to receive something material from God. I mean, that's human instinct. We don't turn down a free lunch. But they can't fathom that their deepest needs are not physical, but rather spiritual. And that the man standing before them is so much more than a man. Rather, he is the one that is going to give his life in order for the world to have life. Friends, the critical question that I want to pose for you this morning, to send you away with as you enter a new week, is whether maybe, just maybe, you're tempted to act a bit like the people in John's gospel this morning. If we're being honest with ourselves, I think we might understand that we want to treat God in the same way that the people this morning did. How often are we tempted to try and tame God as if that were possible? How often are we tempted to put God in a box of our own design, far from the scandal of incarnation and the scandal of the cross? How often are we tempted to put God just far away enough that we can't hear him? Can't hear maybe what God is calling us to do with our time, our money, our actions, our decisions, our hearts? Are we tempted to be happy with God as a hypothetical, but not as the foundation of our lives? Are we happy to receive the material blessings of this world, but not to receive the bread that will allow us to live forever? I'll close now with this thought. I don't want you to get the wrong impression, right? I'm worried that you're going to think that I'm overly critical of the people in John chapter 6. I'm not. I think they were normal people. And I think that if we were in that same position, our reactions might be much the same. And in fact, I will say this as a positive quality of the people in John chapter 6. You know what, friends? They take the time to struggle with Jesus. This week they're complaining, and over the next couple of weeks, their questions and their doubts are only going to grow. And yet the reason why they have complaints and doubts is they've discerned enough of just who Jesus might be. And they're willing to genuinely struggle with those claims. And I think it might be helpful for us to do the same. It might be helpful for us to consider the claims of Jesus, who he said he was, and what he wants for our lives. So my invitation is to take an inventory of what you believe and what you value. Take an inventory of what you cherish and what you love. Let's think about whether we're too easily contented with the stuff of earth, when the winds of heaven itself can be felt by those who are searching. And let's wait in expectation and hope that God is still in the business of drawing people near. God is still in the business of waking people up. God is still in the business of drawing hearts close to his side, transforming lives, renewing spirits, and giving us the bread that truly satisfies. Amen.